Ben Durham said, awesome presentation, thanks Mike. Your talk focused on the crises and some of the solutions we are facing in the near term. Beyond our lifetimes, if you were to speculate, are we or they going to see different approaches that perhaps don't focus so much on protecting and conserving, but more using technology to adapt the planet to become a more uniform global environment with consequent loss of biodiversity, but maintenance of primary biomass production?
Sure.
Mike, would you like to respond to that?
I almost need, it's nice to hear you, Ben, wherever you are, and not surprising from you, a complex question. I think, where are you? Maybe if you are here, maybe I should ask you to summarize that down. There are lots of parts of your question. Do you want to do that, Ben, if you're online?
He probably is. I just have to unmute him. There you are. Allowed to talk.
There are lots of pieces of that question, and I'd have to sit and read it to get where there is. Talking permitted. Are you there, Ben?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Yes. Perfect, Ben. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Great stuff. What you're provoking in us is that we need to protect and try and stop all of these things. And I'm just thinking that from a government perspective, should we be focusing on protecting, or should we be fighting a rearguard action, recognizing that the rate of change in the environment, the slide you showed of the increase in pests coming in and so on, it's inevitable, and so should we be focusing all of our resources and efforts on protection, or rather focusing on developing skills such as genetic modification, synthetic biology, etc., and thinking about saying, well, we're not going to focus so much on indigenous species, but look at species that are, or developing capabilities that are more resistant, and so on. I'm just trying to think, are we, because the Convention on Biological Diversity focuses very much on conservation of what we have, but is this a viable long-term strategy? You provoked some question on that topic. Thank you.
Ben, many that are tuned in will have views on this. I mean, it's such a complicated issue. You know, people often say to us in discussions, well, maybe we should just give up, and there's that issue of just let everything move around the world and do what it does, and we just deal with it. It's a very negative approach, and there are so many different angles that one needs to think about. Perhaps the area that I'm most concerned about, the environment that I'm most concerned about, is the native woody ecosystem, so native forests, native woody ecosystems, because everything we know thus far is where an alien invasive pest has entered and there's a susceptible host. There's pretty well nothing one can do about that. And lots of examples, like Dutch elm disease, chestnut bite, white pine blister, Phytophthora, and natural ecosystems of Australia. One can go on and on. So in those cases, there's absolute devastation. There'll continue to be devastation, and if we can slow that, we should try. Michelle talked about biobanks and preserving and you know, preserving seed sources. I think the answer to your question, at least from my perspective, is, you know, all of that. We've got to do everything to throw up our hands and say, well, you know, everything's going to get everywhere. They're just going to continue to be devastations. Just deal with that with technology is a negative view. Think of coronavirus again. We could think that way as well in terms of human pathogens. At the same time, we depend on plants for our livelihoods and for food, and applying the available and future technologies, I think, is just hugely important. So the rearguard action that you talked about, absolutely, we need to drive that as hard and fast as we can. I mean, I just think of with the coronavirus, the pandemic that we're dealing with. You know, I suppose many in this discussion. I've had colleagues around the world saying, oh, isn't it terrible? South Africa's got a special variant at the time that we had that first, one of the first variants. And I said, hey, this is amazing. It's incredible. It's a testament to the incredible technology that's been developed in South Africa. The South African variant was discovered because we had, from a very early stage, very, very active sequencing of the coronavirus isolates in this country. And that, I suppose, came from the technologies developed based on HIV, AIDS, and TB. So then, my perspective is we should try the very best we can to maintain what we've got and develop the technologies that we use to do that, but also to ensure that we have plants that we depend on in the future. It's kind of all of the above.
Thank you very much, Mike. Michelle Helmer, would you like to respond to the next question? Again, Ben Durham, and I'm not favoring Ben. I'm just think this is an important question. Thanks, Michelle. Another fantastic presentation. With regard to permit issues, are we seeing the increasingly complex export and import permits environment effectively encouraging illegal activities?
Yeah, so it's difficult. There's no data on that. And you'll always get people who will do things knowing that they're breaking the law. But that's usually a very small number of people. And I think there's lots of people who are doing things that are not compliant with the law, but it's not intentional. It's often because they don't know the law, because it's so complex. To go through, I've reviewed the legislation now. I had to read about 20 different pieces of legislation and 1,500 pages of legislation to try and figure out what are the requirements. And so people will break the law, but not intentionally, I think. And it's being pushed now. It's so difficult for biologists to actually just do their work, to do their job, that sometimes I think that they don't actually have a choice. That just in doing their job, they are breaking the law. So I'm really hoping that there will be something that happens to try and address this going forward.
That's very interesting. I think this is an issue that has to be followed up. Wilhelm de Beer, number of people appreciating your presentation. And there is a question which I now can't see. There's a question from Buyesiwe Ngubani. What is the difference between reproductive and non-reproductive trees with respect to the shot-hole borer and Fusarium uwalashi? Okay, I missed that part. She also asked about what is the difference between no, I can't remember that one, and it's not showing up now. And then what exactly do reproductive trees do? Do they spread the disease? What do non-reproductive trees do? Does it help non-reproductive trees?
So, so the beetle attack, as I said, different types of trees, but in some trees it actually establishes the whole gallery, where it then completes the life cycle. So one beetle lays, one female, for example, typically lay on average about 30 eggs in the gallery. These will hatch, and this piece of wood with that gallery in then becomes a source of beetles to the environment. And the fungus in that tree eventually, most of the cases, it eventually kills the tree in the reproductive host. In the reproductive host, which is the majority of tree species, are trees that the beetle is just trying to attack, but it's not successful. For some reason, it leaves the tree, it doesn't like the taste of something or a chemical, or it's repelled, or the fungus doesn't establish. but in many cases the fungus does establish, but we've never seen non-reproductive host trees dying. So they seem to heal up eventually. So that is the main difference between the two. So in terms of management, the important focus should be on the reproductive hosts. And we've seen, for example, in Sandton, I've been in a street 3 years ago where there were the whole street in Houghton that's got big oak trees. And there were 3 heavily stressed oak trees that were sort of dying, and they had some PSHB in them. And we asked that these should be cut down and removed, and it hasn't been done. And then when I got there a year later, the beetle has started spreading to all the other oak trees, but it even went onto trees like podocarpus and other trees that it typically wouldn't prefer, but because the population in the environment of the beetles is so big, they just start causing more and more damage. So in terms of management, the reproductive host trees, when they are infested heavily, when there's a lot of beetles in them, should be removed. So that is our recommendation.
Thank you very much. Also for Wilhelm from Ida Wilson, do you see any resilience in places where the polyphagous shot-hole borer have infested? I mean, are there plants that seem to recover? Effects like that have been seen in willows, in the Tijuana River Valley.
In California, yes. Yes, so that is, at this point, we, unfortunately with COVID, all our surveys, especially down in Tsitsikamma and the Durham area where we do systematic surveys, has been interrupted. But we do see recovery of trees. For example, in the pecan orchards in Jan Kempdorp, the pecan trees which we have inoculated with the fungus, after 3 months, after 6 months, and after 9 months, we can still isolate the living fungus from the tree. But after 12 months, the fungus is dead. So the tree has healed and it's recovered. What has happened in some other places, and that is the question in California, which is a little bit different scenario, is that adult trees have died, and now young trees are sprouting up, or sometimes coppers sprouting out from stems of trees that were heavily damaged by the beetle, and they seem to be recovering. However, my gut feeling would be that if it's a branch from the same tree that come out as coppers, as soon as that branch is thick enough, the beetle will probably go in again. But there might be some acquired host response or defense mechanisms that can actually protect the tree eventually. But it's not been well studied, and it's a complicated answer, Ida, but a very important thing that we need to look at.
Thank you, Wilhelm.
Okay, Ben Durham, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. Yes, just a follow-up question to Michelle, but also to Mike. Michelle was explicit, but Mike did kind of mention it in passing. But from a government perspective, obviously, if policies are developed with a specific intent, and what we need to know, and I know getting data is really difficult, but if things are not functioning as they are intended to do, we need to be alerted to this so that we can consider either changing the policy or enforcing it. And that's kind of the nature of my question to you. We've got really complex access and benefit sharing regulations, for example, and they do have a good intent, but arguably they are very difficult for people in the academic environment to actually comply with. And so we may be seeing people who just ignore or deliberately remain ignorant of the law. And kind of we need to get a feeling of this and whether we should be enforcing or changing. So that was the nature of my question. And I don't know if you or Mike have further comment on the regulatory environment in South Africa? Thank you.
Yes, who would like to address that question?
Michelle, do you want to try first? I can see Wilhelm thinking, and I know this is a part of it. Quite interested in. So, Michelle, you're being hesitant. I know there's so much, Ben, that we can say about this, but let's take, for instance, I mean, there are many different legislations, and I'm not sure which perhaps you're thinking about, but let's take the impact of the Nagoya Protocol on research on biodiversity, our own work. One can approach the issue from the point of saying, well, the intent of the Nagoya Protocol, we agree with and support very strongly. Protect the rights of countries to have the benefits of the organisms that occur there. At the same time, those legislations signed, I mean, I don't know who signed the South African, who went to those meetings and signed on behalf of South Africa, but certainly as academics, I don't think we were ever engaged in those discussions. And that's a huge problem, because there are many elements of that legislation that damage our opportunity as a country to do research. I mean, for instance, if I wanted to legally, if I wanted to collect material from, say, let's say a plant of interest to us and important to the future of the technology of this country in, say, Mpumalanga, I would need to get three kinds of permits. That's fine, but try to get them. And I would challenge, I mean, it's just, when we ask questions and people say, well, we don't know where they are, who the people are. It's incredibly complicated. I could speak on this topic extensively, but these legislations can be incredibly problematic. They can be useful and valuable, but at the same time, I think the issue is implementation. We have wonderful legislations on everything in our lives in South Africa. Our laws are fabulous, but implementation is disastrous. And I'm not going to get into that discussion now, but it's a complicated issue.
Thank you very much, Mike. Jan-Hendrik Venter.
Or maybe Michelle wants to say something.
Oh, sorry. Jan-Hendrik's just got his hand up, but Michelle?
Michelle can go ahead, it's fine.
Yeah, so I think that the legislation does need to be reviewed. So it's not just a matter of kind of forcing academics to be compliant. It's actually that there are problems with the implementation and actually problems with the access and benefit sharing legislation. And its alignment with Nagoya, which is resulting in consignments of material going to the EU with permits being blocked there, or people not being able to publish their work in Europe because there isn't compliance from our side, even though the permits have been issued. So it really needs a very holistic kind of relook at the legislation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Michelle Helmer. Jan-Hendrik Venter.
Thank you, Jancy. I think if I can just do a comment here, maybe if you allow, because I'm mostly from government, but from the agricultural side. So just in general, these international treaties and protocols are, and rightly said, are often signed by politicians and with very little science behind it, if I can put it like that. And I think that is something not unique to South Africa. I think it is a world issue. And maybe this on a more global platform, we need to start to look at how to address these, because it affects everyone. The EU may be the drivers of this type of legislation, like there are also for many other types of legislation, like in terms of sections of the World Trade Organization, for instance. One would see there's so many countries that stand up and say, but hang on, these are over-legislated. And as soon as you have over-legislation, you have non-compliance, and either accidentally or deliberately. The same goes with trade with plants, and I will talk about that tomorrow also, and that's why I perhaps do a comment here now, is that as soon as you do it too restrictive, people start smuggling. It's just a simple nature, and we saw it with Corona. The moment you took the smokes and the drinks away, people started smuggling. It's a very natural response of human nature. And unfortunately, we have to adapt that in our legislation as well, in all means. Yes, the whole thing about bioprospecting and recognition of resources where it comes from is very noble, but if you overdo it, science dies, unfortunately, and we suffer ourselves as government because I think ANSA is still here, but ANSA will, from the AOC, will also can put into that. That is a large issue. We cannot send specimens around. We cannot prospect for biological control agents, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan Hendrik Venter. That was very interesting.